So I saw Migkillertwo's most recent video on secular humanism, and I just had to respond because not only did he besmirch secular humanism, he also bastardized Friedrich Nietzsche and David Hume. These are things which I cannot stand.
I thought that it would be more than appropriate to sport this caricature of Friedrich Nietzsche in a discussion on secular humanism.
Actually, no, it's not appropriate. Friedrich Nietzsche had a very sophisticated and nuanced moral philosophy, in stark contrast to the nihilism of the Joker. Now, this is a common enough mistake, of course, since Nietzsche talked a lot about nihilism, and perhaps even flirted with it a bit. And on top of that, he was very critical of morality, and even dubbed himself an immoralist at one point. So I understand why you make this mistake, Migkiller. But, in truth, Nietzsche was far from a nihilist. He believed firmly in the power of beauty and art, in particular music. He was awed by the human capacity for creativity and wanted to inspire people to make a better world than the one that was handed to them. As far as morality goes, what he detested was the herd morality, or the slave morality of Christians, that told people that the meek shall inherit the earth. Be a good little boy and know your place. That's the shit that Nietzsche couldn't stand. And while he saw emotions like pity to be demeaning, he was very much in favor of human compassion and solidarity. Now, this is just a small glimpse of Nietzsche's axiology, but I hope it's enough to distance him considerably from the Joker. A quick PS, by the way, I actually have a paper on Nietzsche that's been accepted for publication. Unfortunately, in the academic world, that means it could be as much as 2 years or more even before it actually gets published, but, I'll try to keep everybody posted in case you're interested.
While it is true that some atheists can be moral, it's not true that one can be logically consistent and be an atheist and moral realist at the same time.
We'll put on the brakes right there. Who said anything about moral realism? Don Exodus didn't. You seem to be assuming that if you're not a moral realist, then you can't have a justified morality, but that's just not true, and it's easy to point to examples of this. Think about, Bertrand Russell and Jean-Paul Sartre. Both were anti-realists about morality. That is to say that they did not think there was a single moral code that applied to all people at all times the way, say, the laws of nature do. But despite this fact, both men were strong advocates for peace and nonviolence. Were they being irrational or self-contradictory? Of course not. They came to a conclusion on the basis of their individual/social morality that war and violence were bad things. They didn't think that this was a universal law of morality, but it didn't have to be. All that matters is that the moral values that were the basis for this argument were accepted by their respective audiences. In short, just because there's no objective morality does not mean we're consigned to moral nihilism.
David Hume famously pointed out that one cannot extract an ought statement from an is statement. You cannot get an ought from an is. Or, in more technical terms, one cannot derive a prescriptive fact from a descriptive fact.
You're abusing Hume here, but much like your abuse of Nietzsche, you're doing it in a way that many other people have done in the past. You're right about the basic idea of the is-ought distinction, but you're taking it outside of the domain of discourse that Hume was focusing on. When Hume said you can't derive an ought from an is, he was talking about objective facts, things true of nature writ large. Hume recognized that if you're talking about specific individuals, then it's really easy to derive an ought from an is. Here's an example. I am afraid of sharks. This is a descriptive fact about me. You can derive from that descriptive fact a normative fact. If I were in the water and I see a shark, I should get out of the water. Now, you have to add a bunch of other descriptive facts in order to complete the argument, of course. We have to assume, for example, that I don't have a death wish, that sort of thing. But you get the idea. You put all these descriptive facts together, and it's very easy to derive the normative fact. Hume had no problem at all with that kind of derivation. He wanted to deny that you can derive categorical imperatives, to use Kant's language, from general facts about nature. Things like sharks are dangerous. Deriving hypothetical imperatives is just fine. Now, you might object here, as many do, that if all we have are hypothetical imperatives, then you don't really have morality, because then you can just do whatever you want. That's something that Hume would outright deny, and rightly so. What we value is not simply determined by our choices. Our upbringing, our education, our neurochemistry, and most important for Hume, our emotions play a big role in what we care about. Most people have natural sympathies, he says, for other sentient beings. And that basic underlying similarity, which, by the way, arose out of natural selection, is the basis for our sense of right and wrong. Don Exodus brought up Thunderfoot's excellent example of piranhas not killing each other as a great illustration of this point.
On an atheistic worldview, the only transcendental facts are descriptive facts, facts about how a certain state of affairs is. By transcendental, I mean facts which are true regardless of what anyone thinks. Now, that being said, there can therefore be no prescriptive facts on an atheistic worldview.
You're assuming that moral facts have to be transcendental to be moral facts, but you've given no argument for this unstated assumption. To make matters worse, you're actually contradicting yourself. According to your view, moral facts do depend on what someone thinks about them. They depend on what God thinks about them. So there are no transcendent moral facts on your account because they all depend on a mind, namely the mind of God. Now, if you want to carve out some exception for God here, then you've got a lot of work to do. Why is it that if morality depends on what God thinks, that's perfectly okay? But if it depends on what you and I think, somehow that's a flimsy foundation and we collapse into moral nihilism. In fact, the exact opposite seems to be true. If morality depends on what I think and what I feel, then I've got a very good reason to care about morality. On the other hand, if morality depends on what God thinks and I have no say in it at all, it's entirely up to him, then this morality has nothing to do with me. Why should I care about it? That's the position that leads us to moral nihilism.